You won't believe the recent events that Harris household. The hip-hop industry that shone when dancing on stages beneath dazzling lights had abruptly dropped into quiet. It started out like every other day. However, fate took an unanticipated turn. Harris King, the son of the well-known rapper T, was battling for life in the intensive care unit. His expression was bullied with tubes all over his body, and his parents were standing outside the window, totally shattered. Admirers who had matched seeing this young man's high life of celebrity couldn't accept that he was now lying motionless, nearly dead. However, the startling portion is here. This wasn't either a random fight or an accident. Inside, something more sinister had occurred, those walls of the prison. People claimed that King was attempting to maintain composure that night, leaving the noise inside the block. He had requested solitude for a bit, simply to reflect, perhaps to make Planche's next life move. However, within minutes, cries reverberated throughout the hallways. Alarms shrieked, guards fled, and after the commotion subsided, King was discovered motionless on the ground. Physicians hurried him to the medical facility, but it was evidently this was no typical altercation. The injuries were severe, excessively concentrated, and purposeful. You'll be shocked. These security cameras that continuously captured all of a sudden, everything was dark. Each and every second of that assault vanished as though it had been planned to disappear. Tiny arrived at the hospital at the same time that evening. They were sobbing, trembling, shouting the name of their kid, but there was no response. In whispers, nurses said that the circumstances were dire. Machines maintained beeping, displaying traces of life. People started to congregate outside. Admirers, candles being held by strangers and friends as well as praying. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for justice. However, behind fear began to rise despite all the prayers. Could this have been a setup? What if was there a reason why someone wanted King gone? As I mentioned earlier, it wasn't long before rumors circulated that the entire situation was intended. Information from within the prison started speaking softly. King, they said, has angered several people. Not only prisoners, but the types of individuals UI wished to avoid crossing. Rumors circulated that he was aware of covert transactions taking place within, involving money and illegal goods being transported by the SAM officers who were supposed to protect him. If it was yes, he was now a danger. Additionally, in jail, threats don't persist for lengthy. Here's the startling bit though. When the family insisted on viewing the video, according to the warden, the cameras broke down. No clip made it out alive. Sounds odd, doesn't it? T was bursting into tears in public. Via strong, self-assured man looked lost. He was photographed by reporters outside the VCU declaring, "I don't give a damn about justice. All I want is for my kid to survive." Was the desperate, unadulterated wail of a father. However, that line caused a stir on the internet. People started to inquire, what was he saying? Did he already realize that this wasn't a spontaneous altercation? Was he aware of the perpetrator? The most bizarre aspect occurred when a nurse's and audio tape surfaced where this wasn't random. A murmur went, desired his departure. That single sentence altered everything. Since then, the narrative is more than a young man who had been hurt. It turned into a tale of treachery, fear, and quiet. Everyone got going. Making connections that may not have been yet evident. The entire globe held its breath. According to the physician, the following 24 hours were important. Every time the monitor beep sounded as though the truth was about to be revealed. Tiny sobbed till she was scarcely able to take a breath, clinging to T, who simply continued to gazing through the glass of the hospital, murmuring, "Son, hold on." Daddy share, however, is where it becomes intriguing. As the family was wishing for a miracle and inner guidance, the prison was getting ready to disclose what actually took place that evening. You won't believe what came next. As the world was still attempting to understand the startling assault, fresh voices began to appear, bringing with them more anxieties. I'll tell you. The narrative started to twist in unexpected ways. Within the hospital, anxiety increased with each hour that goes by. King's state was erratic, his heart rate increasing and falling on a monitor like a storm. Physicians muttered that the edema in his mental state was deteriorating. Small T stood there, crying uncontrollably, gazing at the ground as though he had witnessed far too much suffering in his lifetime. Panic permeated the entire hospital. And prayers. Everyone in their vicinity waited, wishing for even a tiny indication that King would he open his eyes? However, fate took that night. Things took another unexpected turn. Rumors of a plot in the morning had become blatant charges. Individuals sastered that this was not your typical jail battle. The hit was well planned. What happened next was the most bizarre aspect. An employee of the prison, whose voice was subsequently circulated online, asserted that the guards were instructed to wait a few minutes prior to the altercation. The internet was rocked by the claim. Was someone throughout the system collaborating with individuals on the exterior? Who issued the directive? No one was certain, but everyone concurred there was an odd fragrance. Supporters began referring to it as the worst treachery behind bars. Additionally, when they sought clarification, the authorities' silence turned into deafening. T, meantime, attempted to hold pulling himself together was not conceivable. He was trailed everywhere by reporters, and every tear turned into a news story. At one time, he sobbed and remarked, "If my son fails to make it, the world will burn." Individuals were unsure about whether to consider that a warning or a sign of mourning. A few felt he was aware of the precise person behind the assault. However, this is the startling section. Some of T.I.'s former adversaries began publishing odd messages on the internet. According to one rapper, "When you play with your family is affected by fire." That sentence alone completely upended the internet. Supporters poured into the comments, relating ancient rivalries and speculating on who might have placed the hit order. However, what was different about the story was how fast the world became a battlefield of feelings. The streets of Atlanta were crowded with sobs and candles. People marched, bearing King posters that call for justice for King. Silence was not what they desired, no longer. They sought names, responses, and the truth. I must say that this wasn't simply regarding a single boy in a medical bed. It had turned into a conflict between the general population and the system. Videos showing Tiny crashing in all throughout the hospital hallway, she yells. "They intended to murder my baby," went viral on the internet, leaving every unable to speak. As the globe required justice, medical professionals provided the family with devastating information. The King had been harmed, severe damage to his head, perhaps as a result of a weapon composed of a padlock that has been teed within a sock. It was more than just a brawl, it was a pounding in the style of execution. Viewings demonstrated that it was done intentionally, not rage. The most bizarre aspect, guards were present, but took no action until it was too late. The Harrises were feeling betrayed. They had thought that even justice had rules while incarcerated. However, currently those rules seemed to be non-existent, and as soon as the family began to make demands a formal declaration, an additional twist came that made a huge difference. You won't believe how fast everything has happened. Then it spiraled. The days that follow made Atlanta a place that felt more akin to a film set than actual life. Outside the hospital, the crowds grew. Reporters set up camp at every intersection, and social media became a battleground of hypotheses. Some referred to it as corruption, some attributed it to karma, while others thought this was a written revenge scheme. Years in the past. Here's the startling bit though. Just when folks were thinking things couldn't be worse, an unnamed recording surfaced on the internet. The voice was unsteady, as if speaking in terror. "We were instructed to make it." It stated appear to be a battle, yet the object of those words spread like fire. King. The authenticity of the clip was unknown. However, it was sufficient to rip open all of the wounds that the family was attempting to get close. Let me explain. The world no longer believes in silence because of you. Following that leak, reporters began looking through the past of T, bringing back historical names, individuals he had competitors and conflicts with, crossed unsuccessful transactions. A few declared that this assault was a warning, a communication intended to remind T that even notoriety has its boundaries. According to others, it had absolutely nothing to do with music. That King had discovered something within the jail, Perhaps a secret, perhaps corruption, something he wasn't meant to look. The most absurd aspect was how many insiders concurred that the assault felt excessively too neat, too silent, and too well-timed to arbitrary. Destiny has made an unexpected turn, and the Harris household was stuck in a storm from which they were unable to flee. Within the medical facility, there were no better. King's health continued to fluctuate. He was steady 1 minute. Then his dangerously low heart rate was recorded. Nurses entered and exited in silence, their faces that are white with fatigue. T hadn't in days he left his son's side. His facial hair was hot and the eyes had gotten bigger and hadn't resembled the self. Bigger and hadn't resembled the self. Assured dude at all. Once, the world was aware. Tiny would spend hours of silent prayer, holding King's hand, murmuring, "Baby, you're strong, you'll return." But this is where it becomes intriguing. According to some, that evening, for a few moments, King's monitor went blank. Seconds. His breathing had ceased. Physicians hurried in, yelling commands, battling for his life. For a while, everyone believed it was finished. Then amazingly, the beeping came back. He was barely alive. Away from the crowd, I started crying when I received the news. People were crying, embracing strangers, calling out his name. It seemed as though the whole city was joining in prayer. However, this story was unique because of how the distinction between rumor and truth started to vanish. There was something new every hour. Theory. A guard was paid off. According to one. Another claimed that the entourage of a competing rapper had organized it. Some even thought it was a component of a bigger power struggle within the industry itself, a warning method to other people. No one knew what to believe. No longer. However, one thing was for sure, this was about much than just a youngster in dire state. It had to do with a system. Opening up in front of millions of people. Let's can assure you that T hit his breaking point. That night. He was captured on camera. Leaving the hospital while trembling, shouting at reporters in rage, "I file. Burn if you don't safeguard my family." The entire system stopped working. That clipped viral in a matter of minutes. A few admirers witnessed it. As the suffering of a father. Others stated it. Seemed to be a man who was already aware of it. A lot. The internet began to inquire questions that none could respond to. Why did the cameras malfunction? What made the guards quiet? And why did all of the witnesses also afraid to talk? Every query pusheth the distant reality, and every quiet made the narrative more sinister. As the evening, the Harris family sat while it went on. Silently together in the waiting area, shattered and terrified. Little prayed beneath their exhalation. T gazed indifferently at through the hospital window and on the floor. The red lights outside were flashing. Mingled with thousands of flickering lighting candles in King's honor. Everybody was anticipating news, justice, or for a miracle, perhaps. But in the back of your mind, everyone was aware that something was imminent. Something significant. Something that would alter everything they believed to be true regarding this tragedy. You won't believe what took place. As the last evening, as it got closer, the hospital had transformed into a stronghold. Fans and guards at each door chanting outside with flashing cameras continuously. However, there was silence within. Additionally silent. The lights and the air were both heavy. Gloomy. And the physicians were anxious. Must say that the family had exhausted weeping. Days had gone by with no sleep. Without tranquility. And they were now waiting echoes of the statement, "No parent should ever listen." The physicians had cautioned that if King showed no indications of getting better soon, they may need to think about taking life support off. That sentence struck a chord. T is a knife. He yelled that nobody was going to make the decision for his son, but God. His voice reverberated in the corridors. "You have no say in when my son's story comes to an end." The city stood outside. Still. Overnight, crowds had doubled, become a sea of faces illuminated by candles. Individuals held placards that said, "King's justice and the system's failure." Even strangers who were unaware of as they prayed. The family sobbed. However, this is startling aspect. As everyone prayed, someone dropped another for life within. Bomb on the internet. A mysterious Instagram profile showed up and shared, "The transgressions of the Papa, you fell on the Son." This never regarding King T was the subject. Incident, but the post disappeared. Screenshots were all over the place. Admirers began to think that this assault was anything regarding the youth who was lying in the hospital. It has to do with his dad's previous. In fact, destiny had taken an surprising twist. And it seemed as though the price of fame was being rewritten by the universe. In the moment. Let me explain. At night, the medical facility served as a venue for heartache. Tiny passed out in the hallway. King's cerebral activity after listening was deteriorating. T collapsed on his knees next to whispering to her while holding her hand prayers. Nurses too shed tears while witnessing the suffering that wealth and fame were unable to alleviate. Softly, one of them remarked, "They're simple parents, like everyone else." The most absurd portion occurred a few moments later when the monitor showed a slight movement. A little glimmer of movement. A breath or life. The room went cold. The physician yelled for quiet. King's pulse quickened, stronger for a brief period of time before diminishing once more. However, that tiny flash was sufficient to reassure everyone that he was still engaged in combat. Outside, word got out. Immediately, King Harris exhibits indications of life. Some fans sobbed. Others screamed and, in prayer. Others fell to their knees. The entire city seemed to exhale, after days of holding its breath. However, despite that manner miracle, the reality behind the assault was still hidden beneath silence and lies. The jail was still there. Silent. No news of investigations, no video without names. The Harris O'Leary referred to it as the largest cover-up in history of the state. And as the night deepened, T.I. wrote a message online, colder. They attempted to sever my blood, but it is difficult for us to fall. That one line became the voice of millions of people who had tracked each agonizing moment of this catastrophe. However, this is where it becomes intriguing. Despite all that, the story continued. The rumors persisted in the world that those in charge were strong enough to keep anyone quiet who said. Some claimed that the truth was concealed, inside files that may never be seen daytime. Others thought T was aware of precisely who was responsible, but was awaiting the ideal moment to talk. What was unique about this narrative was that no longer was it about fame or music. It was about justice, survival, and the struggle of a father to save what remains of his relatives. When the sun arose over the hospital in Atlanta was drenched with orange illumination. The crowd is still outdoors. I'm still hoping and praying. Within that ICU, the monitors bleep reverbertesimal to the city's beating heart, living but fragile. If King would, nobody could say if they would ever wake up. However, one thing was for sure. This narrative had altered everything. It revealed how justice could be twisted by power, and silence could conceal the truth, and how suffering could bring millions of strangers together to form on a voice. You'll be shocked to learn that even in the worst of times, hope refused to pass away. This is the end of the story, with a promise instead of answers that the truth will eventually come to light. Just King battled too.